All right. Hello and welcome to everybody who's getting joined in. We went ahead and started just a couple seconds early here just to make sure everybody got into the call. We know there's a little bit of a delay, so we don't want to start talking and then you miss something. And fortunately, at the very beginning, there's not a whole lot to miss other than explaining what we're going to be talking about and making sure you understand some of the things that we hope you get out of this. And so, as you can see on the screen, obviously, today's topic of conversation is the gas and fuel injection program. And what we want you to take away from this is a few things. What the program looks like, what we can talk about when we're in those shops talking to technicians and shop owners, or even those DIY customers that come in and just have questions they don't have answers to. And we're also going to talk about some things that I think are going to be great bullet points and talking points for you when those conversations come up. And so, with that, that's what our agenda looks like. We're going to talk about one, types of fuel injection systems. We're not really going to cover carburation or TBI here. You'll see in a slide later on that we have the customer covered on TBI, but really we're going to talk about the types of fuel injection systems you're going to get phone calls about. You're going to have customers inquiring about. We're also going to talk about what causes them to fail. We're going to go over a couple of tech tips, and then I'm going to pass it off to Aaron, and he's going to talk about what we do when it comes to testing and just the measures that we take to ensure that when you pull one of our injectors out of the box, it's going to work exactly like the OE intended it to and the vehicle is expecting it to. And then we're going to go over a little bit of the myth around remanufactured injectors so that you understand what you're actually selling to a customer when they're asking for remanufactured. And then we'll pass it over to Miss Reese, and she's going to go over the competitive landscape, which I think you'll be very excited to see because when it comes down to it, there's really nobody out there that can compete with our program, meaning your program, when it comes to fuel injectors and related components. And then we'll wrap up with a little bit of information around the sales support that we're putting behind this program so that we can support you, which makes it easier for you to support your customer. So that's our agenda. Now, before we start with that, let's talk about what fuel injectors affect. Obviously, gasoline, right? We got to have gas for this thing to get a combustion event and get the car going down the road. But we got to have it done right. And so when we look at what fuel injectors affect, obviously, poor fuel atomization is going to reduce engine performance. We want to make sure that we have correct atomization with that fuel so that we can get the combustion event that the vehicle is expecting. We also want to make sure we don't destroy our fuel mileage. And so if we have an injector with the wrong flow rate, we can absolutely cause our fuel mileage to completely disintegrate. And then we're going to be throwing a bunch of fuel into the combustion chamber, and we're just going to be losing it through the exhaust, which is a very bad thing. We also have to look at the reliability of the engine. So we got to make sure that our injectors have the correct spray patterns. And you're going to see more about that here in just a little bit. But an incorrect spray pattern can wash away oil from the cylinder walls, which is going to damage components like the piston rings, and the cylinder walls themselves. So we could see the longevity of the engine vastly decreased with the wrong spray pattern of an injector. And then again, just like with the fuel mileage, where we don't want to dump a bunch of extra fuel into the combustion chamber, when we do that, we're going to affect emissions. So incorrect flow rates, even spray patterns can cause unburnt fuel to be sent right through the exhaust system. And I think we all know what's behind that, which is our O2 sensors, our catalytic converter. There's a lot of components that can be damaged when we're just dumping raw fuel into the exhaust. So when the question comes up, what do fuel injectors affect? They affect a whole lot. And really the reliability, the longevity, and the performance of the engine. So with that said, what are the types of fuel injectors we're going to talk about the most? Well, obviously it's going to be multi-port fuel injection and gasoline direct injection. Now, with the multi-port fuel injection, this is the style of injector that is still on the vast majority of vehicles that are actually on the road today. But that started changing around 2010, and you'll see a graph coming up soon where there's a pretty big gap between now multi-port fuel injection and gasoline direct injection. But let's talk about how they work differently. So with multi-port fuel injection, we're going to actually spray the fuel into the intake manifold, and it's going to mix with the air. And then when that intake valve opens, it's going to draw the air and the fuel mix into the cylinder, and it's going to create the atomization needed in the combustion chamber to get that combustion event. So, not, outside of GDI, unlike it, we're going to actually mix this air and fuel first, open the valve, get the spark, and boom, we've got a combustion event. And that's how we're going to get our fuel and our power from a multi-port fuel injection system. But we got to remember these are lower pressure and they're pulse width controlled. So what does that mean? Well, what the port style injector is going to do is it's going to be, at the highest, say 50 to 60 psi, but really more like 25 to 35 psi is going to be the max pressure on these multi-port fuel injectors. But the intake manifold is going to be under vacuum. And so there will also be about 25 to 30 inches of vacuum at idle. This is just the vehicle idling, no power being commanded. But once we command that power, once we open the throttle and the vehicle wants to accelerate, that vacuum is going to drop immediately, especially in a turbocharged vehicle. And now we're going to have the correct pressure needed. And then it's going to compensate for that changing environment at the tip of the injector by using things like either a fuel rail or a fuel pressure regulator. And it's going to change that atmospheric pressure, increase the rail pressure, and it's going to allow the injectors to spray into the intake manifold and get the combustion event. But if you notice there, it says it's pulse width controlled. Now, what that means is as we command the injector, the PCM or the ECU is going to command the injector on so that we get the fuel to mix with the air. The more we need, the more pulse width we get. And the more pulse width means the injector stays on longer or shorter, depending on the command that we're sending. So we can have a lot of effect on our fuel economy based on whether or not we're commanding more or less. But that also is true if the injector is not working properly or it's dirty. We may be commanding more and it's putting more pulse width at it because it's not getting the pressure that it needs. So we're actually using more fuel than we really need to. Now, that's multi-port fuel injection. As we look at 2010 and beyond, everybody's moved to gasoline direct injection. Now, these are a little bit different because the technology has advanced. And with direct injection, instead of mixing the air and fuel prior to the valve opening, we're actually going to put the fuel injector right into the cylinder at the valves. So in this style, we're not going to mix the air and the fuel in the intake anymore. It's not going to be done that way. We're simply drawing the air in through the intake, and then the fuel is being directly injected into the combustion chamber. And so rather than being delivered into that, say, negative 25, 30 inches of pressure, it's now going to be injected up to a few thousand PSI of combustion pressure. Think about this kind of like a diesel. Our diesel injectors spray right into the cylinder. This is very similar with GDI. So it's a little bit more responsive. You get a little bit more power. And there's some efficiency pieces there too that are very helpful, especially with these cars with turbocharged engines and a lot more emissions components. And so this, again, will require the GDI injector to be at a much higher pressure. And so in these systems, we're seeing anywhere between 2,000 and 2,800 PSI. But again, remember, it's being directly injected into the cylinder, so we're not mixing it with the air at the exact same time. Now, it's very important with a GDI injector that it's a good quality GDI injector and it sprays correctly, because the flow rate and the spray pattern of a GDI, just like any other injector, is very important because it's going to direct how the fuel is burned. It's also going to affect how the oiling of the vehicle is going, because if we're spraying down the walls, we're not going to be oiling the pistons and the cylinders like we should. And it will certainly have a pretty detrimental effect on the longevity of the engine itself if these GDI injectors are not spraying properly. So those are the two most common types of injectors, and you'll see something pretty interesting here in a second, because again, we're seeing most of the vehicles on the road still with MFI, but post 2010, everybody's moving to that GDI. So there's just as many up and coming vehicles on the road with those systems involved. So with that said, let's talk a little bit more about how the GDI high pressure system works. So with GDI, again, let's put the system together here. You're going to see it starts in the upper left-hand corner, and we still have a fuel pump in the tank. And that's going to be what we refer to again as the low pressure system. Very much like a diesel. Like I said, we're going to have a low pressure pump that's going to send about 40 to 80 PSI of fuel pressure up to the GDI pump, much like you would on a high pressure pump on a diesel. And then that GDI pump will be mechanically driven off the camshaft, and that's going to be what creates the hundreds, if not thousands, of PSI pressure needed. And then it's going to flow through some, rigid metal lines directly to the fuel rail, where it's then going to be directly injected into the cylinder. And I know this isn't the best picture. We took this at the auto show because it was a nice cutaway. We could actually see what we were looking at. But that shiniest spot right in the middle of that picture on the upper right-hand side, that's what's called a cam follower. And on the left side of it is the spring for the GDI pump, and on the right side of it is the cam lobe of the camshaft. And as the camshaft rotates, it it moves that cam follower, which spring actuates the GDI pump, and that's how we build that pressure. So another piece to this that we have to remember is that proper maintenance is going to be key, because if we're sludging up or damaging the camshaft from poor maintenance, we're also going to be affecting the GDI pump and the process of a GDI injector being commanded properly at the same time. So again, it's very similar to a diesel, and also honestly, it's pretty much similar to a MFI system. The only difference is we're going to have a GDI pump in the middle, and we're going to be directly injecting those fuel commands into the cylinder itself. Now, I said I'd show you something interesting. Well, this is something everybody on the counter needs to know, all of our parts professionals need to know, and all of our sales folks need to know when they're out there talking. And it's this. There are certain vehicles now, and a lot more are going to be doing this, where they have decided, let's go with both systems. Well, why is that? Well, we'll see here in a minute. One of the common reasons that injectors fail would be carbon deposits built up, especially on GDI injectors. And so, in order to get better fuel economy and better power and keep those carbon deposits from building up, a lot of manufacturers are now moving towards dual fuel systems on the vehicles. So the case here, an 18 to 23 F-150 or Mustang, or a 16 to 19 Audi 3.0, these vehicles are going to have both MFI and GDI injectors. We'll have 12 injectors total on the Audi, and we'll have 16 injectors total on the Ford. And here's how this system works. We'll have the MFI injector that's doing the mixing before going into the cylinder for things like idle and low speeds and low command. And that's going to give us better fuel economy when we're not going too fast and we're not commanding too much power. But then as soon as we stomp our foot on the gas pedal and we need to go faster, it's going to switch. It's going to move into the GDI system where we're going to directly inject into the cylinder. So there's a lot of value to this in the sense that we can get better economy when we're not really commanding much, and we can get better performance when we need it. But also by using the MFI and those lower needs like the idle and low speeds, as those combustion events happen, the MFI injectors will, in a sense, actually be cleaning the tips of the GDI injectors, hopefully keeping those carbon deposits from ever building up in the first place. So one of the most important things about this slide that I want you to take away is, if you look up injectors for a vehicle, and it's like one of these in this range, and it shows both versions, it's not a mistake, and you don't have to pick between the two. You just have to know which one they need, because it very well could be that they need both. So if we have a diagnosis that says, hey, we need an injector on bank 3, well, we kind of need to know which injector it is. Is it an MFI or is it a GDI? Because we could put the wrong one in there. So just remember that whenever you have a customer call, you're talking to a technician. If it pulls up with both, again, it's not a mistake. We're just needing to know which one it is, because it could possibly need a total of 16 or 12, depending on what happened with that fuel system. So there's a lot of things that go bad when a fuel injector fails, but the most important here is we have to think about the fuel rail itself, or the fuel bank, that bank of cylinders, and what it's going to do to the emission system and also the cylinder walls when we have a bad injector. So if we look at the image here, if you look at the bottom, you see we have a bank of 4 injectors. They all have the little blue star. There's 4 of them. They're the same size. And what that's telling us is that as the ECU is commanding fuel on and off, those 4 cylinders are getting an even disbursement of fuel, meaning that bank is running properly. It's not lean. It's not rich. It's doing exactly what the car is expecting it to do. But if we look at the top, well, notice we have a dead cylinder there. We have a cylinder not firing at all. And now all of a sudden we have the other 3 cylinders firing a lot more than what you see on the bottom bank. And here's why that is. The ECU can only make adjustments for the bank. If we have a dead injector and it's not doing what it's supposed to do, the ECU doesn't know which one it is. It just knows that the pressure on that bank is not correct. So what's going to happen is we're going to command more pulse width, and we're going to command the fuel on for longer so that we can build that pressure. But the problem is now we're actually sending way too much fuel through 3 cylinders because we're not sending any through 1. And what that means is we're now going to be putting way too much fuel into those 3 cylinders. It's not all going to get burnt like it's supposed to, and it's going to go straight out the exhaust, meaning it could damage the oxygen sensor, and it most certainly will over time. Even more importantly, though, it could destroy the catalytic converter. And I don't know if anybody here has ever seen a catalytic converter glow red hot, but I have, and it's because of a super rich condition on a bank. And when that happens, it's going to cost them a lot more than just some fuel injector replacement. So this is what we have to remember here. Unfortunately, we don't have a sensor per injector, which, maybe we will one day, but for now, when the ECU sees an issue with pressure on one bank, it's just going to command those injectors on longer to get the right amount of fuel pressure and fuel into that bank. It doesn't even know that one cylinder is not getting fuel. So we don't want that to happen. We don't want an injector to fail, because we're not only going to, decrease the longevity of the engine and the performance of the engine, but we could easily take out a lot of components in the process that we really don't want to see go bad. So that's what can happen when they fail. But what causes them to fail? Well, obviously, electrical problems are one of them. Repeated heat cycles and vibration over, tens of hundreds of thousands of miles. And think about this kind of like an ignition coil. You can't fix the electrical problems. It's all one unit. You can't tear it apart and fix a terminal or something like that. And so, electrical problems, when they happen, there's not much you can do about it. You have to replace the injector. Same with an ignition coil. But contaminated fuel is a huge one too. Dirt, debris, low quality fuel, anything that clogs or partially clogs the injector nozzle is going to have a profound impact, not only on flow rate, but the spray pattern, where the actual pattern directs to. And you'll see something with Aaron here in just a moment about how this fuel comes out of the injector. And you'll see it really only takes less than a grain of sand to clog one of these up. And so when that happens, we have to replace it. Cleaning it really is not an option. And in those cases, we have to remember too, if one got debris in it, the others are probably going to fail too. And so it's always a good idea to try to replace those as well, or at the very least, reseal them, because when we take these injectors off as a bank, it's never a good idea to put them back on with the old seals. We want to put new seals on them. And then, like I said, on the bottom left-hand side, the carbon buildup. Again, this is most common issue on GDI injectors, which is why you'll see those dual fuel systems, because the hope is with the MFI included, it's going to keep this from happening. But on most vehicles, it's still just a GDI injector, which means carbon deposits will build up very fast. It's going to make it very hard for that fuel to flow correctly and spray in the right pattern. And then again, obviously a leaking injector. So this is a huge point that I always make with injectors. If you pull a bank of injectors, whether it's MFI or GDI, we have to reseal them. We need new O-rings on the MFI injectors, and we need new O-rings and Teflon rings on the GDI injectors, because what we don't want is to put a new injector back in, and then the other three or the other two, however many is on the bank, are leaking because a seal got pinched or a seal got rolled, or the seal was just worn out because it had 75,000 miles on it. So worst case scenario, if you're replacing just one injector, we should always be recommending a seal kit to go for the others on that bank. And so I said I'd give you a couple tech tips, and I will before I pass it off here. But the first one is, and again, these are really good pieces of information, especially if you have a DIY customer that needs help, or you have one of those shops that has a new apprentice or a new technician that's learning the ropes. If you have one injector fail, it's always a good idea to replace the fuel injectors in matched sets. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to do all the injectors, but at least all the injectors on that bank. And, again, we know that the customers vote with their wallets. There's nothing we can do about that, but it's always a good idea for us to recommend this, because what we don't want is, two injectors or three injectors on a bank of three or four that are going to cancel out the performance improvements of that new injector. If we have one that failed, but we have two or three on that same bank that have a bad spray pattern or the flow rate's wrong, now we're only going to have one injector spraying like the original one did and how the car expects it to, and we're going to have some performance issues with that. So if we can get the customer to vote with their wallet the right way, always try to replace these in match sets. Now, when it comes to GDI, we also have to remember there are a lot of one-time use components on these. So the bolts that hold the GDI pump on, one-time use. They have to be thrown away and new ones put on. Same thing with the high-pressure fuel line. Now, it's not shown in this image here, but when you take a high-pressure fuel line off of a GDI pump and you take a new one out of the box, both will have a yellow tag that says throw away or discard when removed. It cannot be reused, and it's because the bolts and the lines are a crush fit. Once you torque them down, they actually change in the way that they size up. So when you take them off, you're not going to be able to torque those down properly again, which is going to cause a lot of issues with pressure, leaking, and lubrication for that pump. Now, it's not mandatory to replace that cam follower down there, but if we're going to put the old high pressure fuel pump back on, we know it's good, no problem. We're going to replace those fuel lines. We're going to replace those bolts. There's nothing wrong with changing the cam follower and putting a new one on, simply because this is what helps build that pressure. That cam follower is, again, going to go on the cam shaft lobe, and it's going to impact that spring. If there's any wear on the cam follower, it's always a good idea to inspect it and see if maybe we should replace that as well. But for sure, we need to do the bolts and the lines. And then remember, and this is especially true with GDI injectors, if we have a vehicle overheat, we have to replace the head gasket, maybe have the cylinder head resurfaced or something like that. When that happens, you're going to see the injectors fail. You're going to have damage to the injectors. You're going to have a lot of carbon deposits, and you're probably going to have issues with the seals on them. So in these cases, it's always a good idea to do new fuel injectors on that entire cylinder, since it's already torn apart. We don't want to put it back together and then have the spray pattern or the flow rate of that GDI injector be wrong and just cause more damage than what you already had with the head gasket failing or something like that, or cracking the head. And remember, it's really no additional labor. The engine's already apart. It's just the cost of the injectors themselves. Again, we know the customers vote with their wallet, but this is a good conversation piece to have with, again, like an apprentice, a new tech, or somebody on the counter. So that's my piece. I'm going to pass this over to Aaron. He's going to talk to you a lot about things like spray pattern and flow rates that really impact how injectors work. So Aaron, the show's yours. I'm going to give it to you now.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Corey. The few weeks ago, I had the chance to travel down to one of our facilities in Greenville, South Carolina, where we manufacture, test, and develop fuel injectors. And the purpose was really to follow the engineering team through as they did some performance testing on multiple fuel injectors across a few different brands. And one of the things that we tested for was spray pattern. This is the angle of which the injector is going to spray fuel down into the cylinder. And they do change based on application, but it's very, very important that it's correct and that it matches OE. This particular application, OE calls for a spray pattern of 20 degrees. When we tested the OE injector, that's exactly what we saw. When we tested the BWD injector, well, that's exactly what we saw. So the performance matched OE exactly. Where it got a little bit dicey was when we tested a few of the low-cost competitors. And what we saw from one of them is that it was too narrow. Now, this it's not dangerous. It will still work. But what does happen is it doesn't allow the fuel to atomize as efficiently as it could. And that generally results in a little bit less vehicle performance, potentially could affect fuel economy if the ECU decides that it needs to start sending a little bit more fuel into that cylinder to get the combustion that it's looking for. But it would work, and it wouldn't trigger the check engine light. What we saw from another low-cost unit was much worse, and that is when the spray pattern is significantly too wide. In these cases, what can happen is the fuel can actually drip down out of the manifold into the cylinder and start to wash away the oil from the cylinder wall. And this can, it does take time, but what we see when this happens is long-term damage to the cylinder itself and the piston rings. So, the one thing you really, really don't want to see out of a low-cost injector is a spray pattern that's too wide, but unfortunately, it happens. The other thing we tested for was flow rate. And this is how much fuel the injector is going to meter over a very specific period of time. This test was all done over 90 seconds. Again, first was OE to establish the benchmark, and that it filled up the vials to the levels we thought it was supposed to. And the thing that is really good to see across both OE and BWD is how consistent all three injectors were. That's the sign of good engineering, good testing, good calibration. On the first low cost unit, there was two issues. Probably the most worrisome was that they're just inconsistent. One of them was fueling much more than the other ones. The other problem was overall, these were overfueling. These are going to dump more fuel into the cylinder than what the ECU is going to expect. Uh, it is possible, the ECU can adjust for this to a degree, but what could really be problematic is that middle injector that is going to continue dumping much more fuel than the vehicle would like. And then what we saw from the other low cost unit was underfueling. I suppose the good news here is that they were consistent, but the obviously there's a problem here with the metering or the calibration because they just didn't flow as much fuel as we would have expected to see. Again, the ECU can adjust a little bit, but if the injector can only flow so much fuel, then you certainly risk some long-term damage of running an engine too lean for a long period of time. The Go ahead. The real key to an injector, as far as how consistent they are, how well they're going to perform, it's all about the metering disc. This is the little piece that's welded on to the end of it that has the holes or the orifices in it for the fuel. We're fortunate in being a fully vertically integrated supplier where we design, manufacture our own metering discs. These absolutely have to be, everything about them must be correct and match OE performance. All of ours are application specific. We don't use batch discs the way some low cost competitors may. And I think the other thing that's critical is how we use lasers to drill these holes, but then we also make sure they're indexed correctly because that matters. You could have the right metering disc, but if it's not indexed correctly on the cylinder, the spray pattern isn't going to be exactly what it needs to. And you can see some of the designs in there, how they're not entirely symmetrical. So on all of them, this is one very important aspect of an injector. It's difficult to see with the naked eye, but if you take a magnifying glass, you can certainly look at that. If ever anything doesn't look exactly like OE, it's going to be problematic. And sometimes the size of the holes it's difficult to tell with the naked eye. But of course, these patterns and the holes, the angles these things should always match OE exactly. That one thing we'll briefly touch on is kind of this idea or this myth of a remanufactured injector, and it becomes harder to actually understand or believe how folks are able to remanufacture an injector when you really know how a gas fuel injector is made. One thing I want to say is it's very possible to remanufacture a diesel injector. They're entirely metal components. They can be disassembled, cleaned, and new components can easily be installed, and they can be remanufactured. Gas fuel injectors, especially GDI injector, I mean, this is a different deal. When you were making them, the first thing we do is put the inlet tube together, and this is multiple components that are welded together to make that internal tube. Then the electronic components are added to it. The coil windings are wrapped around it. And then the entire piece is sealed inside of a plastic overmold. The manufacturing process of these isn't that different than the way we make an ignition coil. And because all of these components are actually sealed into that plastic housing, they can't be taken apart or disassembled. It's a complete modular design. So, what's out there, I mean, the majority of these remanufactured injectors that are out there are just old injectors that have been cleaned and have new seals on them. They'll have old original electronic components on it and, with thousands and thousands of heat cycles on them. So what you really get, and what you're able to go to the market with BWD, is a brand that's backed by 15 R&D centers around the world, 21 in-house manufacturing facilities, including Greenville, detailed testing and performance analysis of new applications, as well as end-of-line testing, on-vehicle testing, where we actually test new injectors, new GDI fuel pumps at our vehicle testing center in Texas. And then, we try our best to support you folks with detailed and comprehensive marketing pieces that you're able to take to the street and talk about this program to your service provider customers. We understand there's other choices of fuel injectors out there, but I think the case for an injector like BWD and recommending that becomes easier when you really compare this head to head with some of the alternatives that are out there. What we see on the low cost Asian source stuff, yes, it is less expensive, but these folks have very, very limited quality control and testing, which leads to really inconsistent performance across the injectors. And on the reman side, as we discussed, these are largely old units that have just been cleaned, flushed, and have new seals. They generally work okay initially. Spray patterns and flow rates usually test pretty well because they're cleaned OE injectors, but it's impossible to know how long they're going to last on a customer's vehicle. And then you compare that to a program like ours, which is entirely new, not reman. The components have all been tested and validated. And then I think that the thing that really sets us apart from not just these folks, but even from some of the OE folks, is being able to go to market with a complete program, wide coverage, a lot of injectors, but also the related components that are often needed or required for a complete fuel injection service. And Aris will talk a little bit more about that.
All right, thank you, Aaron. And Corey for those tech tips and explanation of the gas fuel injection system. Now, let's talk about what BWD offers. So this slide is a quick reference menu to one of the most complete fuel injection program in the industry. This program will help you capture more sales and ensure complete and confident repairs. We start with our 100% new injectors covering all major types like TVI injectors, over 750 SKUs in MF5 injectors, and the new technology leader GDI injectors. Each one is engineered to meet OE performance and backed by our in-house manufacturing and testing expertise. We also offer the related components from fuel fill lines and fuel pressure sensors to dampers, regulators, and service kits. These parts aren't optional, they are essential. And if you're not offering them, you're risking an incomplete job and leaving money on the table. That's where BWD comes in. We've done the hard work of assembling this program so you don't have to. With industry-leading coverage, OE matching quality, and a full range of support parts, we're proud to be your one-stop shop for gas fuel injection. When it comes to delivering complete solution, BWD leads and the rest follows. This chart shows just how much injector technology has evolved and how far we've come in our industry. In the 1980s, TVI injectors dominated. By the mid-90s, MF5 injection became the most popular. And today, we're seeing a major shift toward GDI and dual injection systems like Corey said earlier. BWD has stayed ahead of the curve throughout it all. We now offer over 990 new injectors, covering more than 98% of the US VIO. That's over 272 vehicles, meaning 272 million opportunities. So no matter what era of fuel injection your customer is working, whether it's TVI, MF5, or GDI, you can count on BWD to deliver the parts, coverage, and quality to get the job done. One program, all technologies, complete confidence. As you can see on this slide, clearly shows where BWD stands in the market. Obviously, it's on the top, with both new MF5 and GDI injector has the total coverage. On the left, you see our new MF5 injector competitor landscape with 762 SKUs, including brand new MF5 multi-packs injectors. BWD outspaced every other supplier, including remanufactured programs. That means better coverage, more first call opportunities, and fewer lost sales and returns. And on the GDI side, it's the same story. We live with 193 new injectors, and we are continuing to expand as this is a growing technology. Unlike many others who rely on reman options, we offer new OE matching injectors that installers can trust out of the box. When your customers need fuel injection, whether it's legacy MF5 or the latest GDI, BWD give you the best coverage, the highest quality, and the confidence to deliver the complete solution. A great upsell opportunity is our MF5 multi-packs. These should always be offered when a customer is looking for one injector, like Corey mentioned. When selling or installing only one injector, it's a great opportunity to offer the set. Imagine all of the injectors are the same age and have the same number of miles, right? Or maybe not. But do you think the other injectors will last a long time like the new injector? Or do you think the older worn injector will work as well as a new single injector that the customer or you will be installing? When a customer walks in or calls for only one injector, there's a good chance for other injectors to be worn out. Offering a full set not only improves vehicle performance but also reduces labor time and comebacks. With 22 kits available covering over 36 million vehicles, these packs are ideal for popular platforms like GM trucks and SUVs with high volume and high demands. Plus, fewer boxes to stock, fewer part numbers to look up. It's a clear solution for yourself and your customers. Multi-packs make the sale easier, repair cleaner, and your customers happier. And that's a win across the board. Not only do we have industry-leading injectors coverage today, but we are also committed to offering the most comprehensive aftermarket program for years to come. What you see here are examples of MF5 injectors that are gaining momentum. We want to share this real-time market intel so you can be better prepared for the next wave of demand. This category, especially among the domestic applications like Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, and Ford, is seeing increased replacement activity. High VIO parts like FJ 1431 with 3.5 million VIO and FJ 1520 with over 800,000 VIO coverage represents growing sales opportunities. We recommend reviewing inventory now and planning proactively because these part numbers are positioned to become top sellers, and we want you to be ready before the demand spikes. With BWD, you're not just stocking for today, you're ready for tomorrow. And now, just like MF5, GDI is a fast-growing opportunity in the aftermarket, and we got you covered as well. This slide highlights a few GDI injectors that are quickly gaining momentum thanks to the growing repair demand and high VIO coverage. These examples span both import and domestic brands, including high-volume platforms from Hyundai Kia, Ford, and Honda. Parts like FJ1438 and FJ1489 covers over 1 million BIL in the industry, making them smart decisions for stocking ahead of the rising demand. As GDI system ages and vehicles hit high mileage, injector failures are becoming more common, so this is a category you want to watch closely. With BWD, you're not reacting, you are staying ready. Be first to market, first to shelf, and first call when they need it. Gasoline direct injection systems are complex, and the repair goes beyond just replacing an injector. That's exactly why BWD offers a complete solution for the GDI system. From high-pressure fuel pumps and fuel feed lines to camshaft followers, seal sensors, and even complete service kits, we give you the coverage to tackle the entire job. Our commitment to provide industry-leading aftermarket support doesn't stop at injectors. We back it up with a full range related components from fuel pumps, fuel feed lines, sensors, gaskets, and more, because that's what it means to be a true one-stop shop. When you stack the full GDI program, you're not just selling parts, you're solving real problems for your customers. And that's exactly what makes BWD the choice for complete GDI service. And I think Corey mentioned this earlier, but did you know that high pressure lines with yellow tags should never be reused? These are designed for single use only. Reinstalling them can lead to leaks, performance issues, and potential safety risk. So we all know how popular the GDI system are in today's vehicles, and that demand is only growing. If you want to be in the GDI business, these are the parts you need to stock. This slide highlights essential GDI components, including some of our top-selling part numbers like GDP 105, which is a high-pressure fuel pump for GM trucks and SUVs, and GDL 103 and GDL 104, which is the high-pressure fuel feed lines for also GM vehicles, and SK 106, which is a injector seal kit for Audi and Volkswagens. These aren't optionals. These parts are the complete job and prevent comebacks. At BWD, our goal goes beyond offering top quality components and strong BIO coverage. We are here to improve the repair experience by offering a complete solution from the first part to the last bolt. When you stack these parts, you're not just meeting demand. You're positioning yourself as a true GDI ready partner and helping your customers to get the job done right the first time. So this is one of the most exciting additions to our fuel injection program, which is the first GDI high pressure fuel pump kits available in the aftermarket. This actually reminds me of one of the time that I used to have a Honda Pilot, and this specific model demand a specific fuel, and I went to a gas station that I guess it added with water or something else in the fuel, and as soon as I took off, the engine light came on in my dashboard. So I had to go right away to the dealer. When I got there, the fuel that I added in the tank damaged the whole fuel system. So I had to actually replace the fuel feed lines, obviously, injectors, and the fuel pump, and the gaskets, and all the parts, which it cost me a lot of money. But, thank God that now us, BWD, we are the first aftermarket who has complete kits to solve problems like the one that I had. These kits include both fuel pumps and GDI followers and all the parts that are needed depending on the application. This innovation didn't go unnoticed. So BWD received a prestigious New Product Award at the Apex of 2023 for these kits. We currently offer 7 kits covering high volume applications from Hyundai to Ford, and we are ready in identifying more coverage coming in 2025. And the bottom line is, no other supplier offers this level of diagnostic support and OE-style completeness in single bags. This is a perfect example of how we are helping shops save time, reduce comebacks, and get the job done right. And to wrap it up, let's talk about what truly sets the BWD apart. Our commitment to quality and back it up with rigorous testing. At this point in the sale, your recommendation matters the most. Customers trust what you trust. And this slide is about giving you the most confidence. All BWD MF5 and GDI injectors are 100% new and tested. Every part undergoes initial life cycle validation and an end-of-line testing before reaching the shelf. In fact, our process includes more than 35 different tests and inspections covering everything from endurance and spray patterns like Aaron mentioned, and the thermal cycles, vibration, and flow calibration. But we don't stop in the lab. Like Aaron also mentioned earlier, and you probably seen Corey in some videos in our YouTube channel. We also run on vehicle testing at our Texas Testing Center to validate performance in real-world conditions. Whether you recommended ignition components or fuel delivery parts, you can be sure that every BWD product is engineered and tested to meet OE performance. We made investment to build trust with you and your customer. So when you see BWD on the backs, you can rest assured it is quality design, quality built, and quality tested every time. Now, let's go back to Aaron so he can talk more about our sales support.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much. So I know we've covered a lot today, and one of the things we do want to spend just a little bit of time on are the materials that are available to you to help you take this message to the street. How we can help arm you to talk to service provider customers as well as even a retail customer on the front line if that's what you're doing. So we have multiple printed materials that are available to you, including we have several what's in your box flyers that are one-page flyers, as well as a very detailed 6-page program brochure on gasoline fuel injection. The other thing we have is a pretty robust YouTube channel that we built out over the years. The BWD channel has right around 15,000 subscribers. We have a fuel injection specific playlist that has 12 videos on it. And then we also have additional playlists that are vehicle specific that cover multiple systems, diagnostic, installation videos within those particular vehicles rather. So yeah, just to tie this thing up, just want to let you folks know that our gas fuel injectors are never reman, 100% new, never remanufactured. We manufacture our own in America in Greenville, South Carolina. They're tested, they're calibrated for optimum engine performance and fuel economy, tested in the lab. We have, I think, the thing that really sets this program apart, even from the other folks that are doing a good job and making good fuel injectors, is the program, or just the wide coverage that we have and all of the related components that we have. And then we also have the sales support and training materials available to really help you take this to the street. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Aris. I think you wrapped that up beautifully there, Aaron. Again, our hope here is that soon after this call, you're going to be getting a conversation around injectors, hopefully even GDI injection systems, and you'll know exactly what to promote because you know you have the complete program. You know they're going to work the way the car expects them to work, and they're going to last. They're going to help the longevity of the engine, and we're not going to have comebacks. So that's today's goal. Hopefully you took that away from it, and we'll see you next month when we'll be talking about some evaporative emissions components. Have a wonderful day, everybody. And again, thank you for being here.